So in today's video, we are going to be discussing the news that Carson Wentz has been traded to the Washington Commanders. Now, before we get into the video, please consider liking and subscribing. And without wasting any more time, let's get right into the video. So I have a lot of thoughts right now when it comes to Carson Wentz being traded to Washington. Now, I'm not going to lie, when this news first broke, I personally just thought it was kind of funny because we all saw the way that the season ended for the Colts, and it was just kind of laughable that he ended up, after everything that has happened with Carson Wentz in his career, that he just ended up in Washington. I mean, it really doesn't get any funnier than that if you ask me. He just goes to Washington, a place that's not a good place to be at, and Carson Wentz, a guy who has been paid his entire career like a top quarterback, goes to that situation. So for that, when it first broke, that was my first initial reaction, that it was funny. But the more you think about it, there's a lot more things that you could think about with this situation that come up. Like, one, it's officially boom or bust time for Carson Wentz in his career, because he was given a massive contract in Philly. That didn't work out. He ended up getting benched for Jalen Hurts. Then he goes to Indianapolis. Now, granted, the season in Indianapolis was honestly going fine all the way up until the final week of the season. Now, Carson Wentz, I don't think necessarily was a key factor in the Colts really winning any of the games that they did win. I think it came down to their great running game and their defense. And Carson Wentz, more times than not, he wasn't getting talked about as a good quarterback. He was getting talked about because of the horrendous interceptions that he was throwing on a constant basis. Some of the interceptions that Carson Wentz was throwing this past season were some of the worst interceptions and some of the worst turnovers I have ever seen. The ones against the Titans come to mind. I think he had one against the 49ers where he had a shovel pass where we were just like, well, he needs the shovel pass needs to be banned. Like, that's literally how I felt. So Carson Wentz, he had his chance, because some people says he needs to resurrect his career. He had that chance in Indy. It was a disaster in Philadelphia. He got a complete reset in Indianapolis, and he didn't take advantage of the moment. Most people are judged based off of how they perform in the biggest moment when it matters the most. What mattered the most was that final week of the season and the Colts playing Jacksonville. And to make the matters worse, Jacksonville's fans were literally dressed up as clowns. Because keep in mind, Jacksonville's not a good football team. They have a rookie quarterback. Their head coach was gone midway through the season. It's a dysfunctional franchise. And for the Colts to go into that game and Carson Wentz to not be able to lead his team to a victory when it mattered the most, it's really, really bad for Carson Wentz. Because the one chance that he had to prove, because if you think about it, the Colts were that team that everybody was dubbing the team nobody wanted to play in the playoffs. And in a matter of 3 hours, they went from the team nobody wanted to play in the playoffs to not even making the playoffs. He didn't show up in the biggest moments when they needed it. And then that leads me to my next point. Everybody's saying Carson Wentz was bad because he didn't have any help around him. And I think that's an absolutely garbage argument, because if you look at Phillip Rivers the year before, had the exact same roster and led the Colts to the playoffs. And Phillip Rivers was a dude that was slow, couldn't move, literally ran probably a 6-second 40 at that point in his career, and he led the Colts to the playoffs. And Carson Wentz, a guy that's more athletic and a guy who can move around much more easily than Phillip Rivers did, couldn't even lead the Colts to a playoff appearance in a game where they had to beat the Jacksonville Jaguars to get into the playoffs, a cakewalk that I think literally any other team in the NFL would have beaten Jacksonville. Now, in a way, yeah, their defense kind of disappointed. You know, you had Trevor Lawrence looking like the generational talent in that final week that we thought he could be. You know, the defense did disappoint, but Carson Wentz also had a chance to make a big impact. And people are trying to make the argument that he doesn't have weapons around him. And I think that's a garbage argument for a guy that gets touted as one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL every single time the discussion about him comes up. To disappoint like that, I think is garbage. He has to elevate the guys around him. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's a good argument to say that Carson Wentz doesn't have help around them. Lamar Jackson really hasn't had help around him his entire career. He's been pretty solid his entire career. And Phillip Rivers had the exact same roster the year before, and he went to the playoffs. It's not a good look for Carson Wentz. So people saying it's a chance to resurrect his career, I don't think I think it's literally boom or bust. He has a bad season next year. It might be done for Carson Wentz, because I think people are still riding that one season where he was good before he got injured, and ever since then people constantly ride that season, and I'll be honest, we have not seen it since that season. He was good at times last year, but the mistakes he made overshadowed anything good that he did all of last season. And if you look at the teams now, the Colts, well, they obviously lost out on this one because of the trade that they made with the Eagles a couple of years ago. The Colts are now without a first-round pick and a quarterback, but I don't think the Colts care right now because they're so pissed off about the way that the season ended that they would rather not have Carson Wentz on the roster right now than deal with anything else surrounding the situation. Like, they literally got rid of Carson Wentz with an offseason where there's really no more big name quarterbacks left on the market other than Jimmy Garoppolo. The NFL draft this year is garbage when it comes to quarterbacks. There's really no top prospects of quarterbacks this year that like we have in years past. So the Colts are without a quarterback now. And the fact the Colts would rather be without a quarterback, and they lost out on a first, and now they don't have a first round pick. That goes to the Eagles because Carson Wentz played 75% of the snaps. It's not a good look for Carson Wentz that a team would rather not have a quarterback than keep a guy that couldn't make the big plays in the big moments when they really, really needed him to. And then you look at the biggest winner from this, it's not the Colts, it's not Washington. I don't think either one of those teams really won. I guess in a way Washington won because they're going to truly see what maybe Terry McLaurin can finally do on that offense. You have Antonio Gibson on that offense. So Carson Wentz is going to a situation where he finally has weapons. So if he's just a bad quarterback next year, it's done for him. It's done. This excuse that he doesn't have weapons, I don't like it, because when you have a guy who was literally a year away from retiring, leading a team to the playoffs, and you can't do it, I don't think it's a good look for Carson Wentz right now. I really do not think it's a good look for him. But the team that won out on this entire trade is the Eagles. The team that it doesn't even involve. This trade doesn't involve the Eagles, and they are the team that won this trade, which is just mind-blowing that a team isn't even involved and wins it. Because now they get to play Carson Wentz twice a year, so they know what Carson Wentz is, so they have everything riding on them, and so the defense of the Eagles already has an advantage there. When they traded him to the Colts, they didn't have to take on the garbage they got rid of the garbage contract that he signed a few years before that, so they didn't have to take on what it was like $107 million guaranteed or whatever it was. It was a huge contract, so the Eagles didn't have to deal with that anymore, and now they get a first round draft pick. So the Eagles, they have draft picks, they don't have the garbage contract anymore, and they don't have Carson Wentz on their roster. And the Colts, in a way, they did win this because they don't have the garbage contract anymore, but they do lose out on a first-round pick. And then you have Washington, who's just sitting there. And I'm just like, well, did Washington really achieve anything? Like, Taylor Heinicke was solid most of the season. Like, he's not an elite quarterback. He's not top tier. But he was okay for himself. I think Washington's defense let them down more than their offense did, because what hopes do we have with that offense, really? We never really think of Washington. We don't think of Washington of anything, but from years past, we thought of their defense. So the situation for Carson Wentz, it's not good. It's weird. I never thought I would have an opinion on this, but it's an indictment on Carson Wentz now, because Washington, who's a dysfunctional franchise, took him. The Colts would rather not be without a quarterback. And my biggest winner of this whole thing is the fact that the Eagles don't have to deal with them anymore. And now the entire NFC East is laughing again because they get to play Carson Wentz twice a year now. So if anything, the biggest winners of all this thing is the NFC East, because they get to play Carson Wentz and they know what he is. But the NFL news cycle just keeps on giving. Again, the NFL is king. It keeps on giving. It's Christmas every single day with the NFL, because this will be the news that we talk about until the next news story break, because now we're on to free agency, and that is going to be very, very exciting.